Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 136th episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this episode, I'm going to delve a little bit deeper into this whole question of the origins of life. If you didn't watch the two previous episodes, I really encourage you to watch them because obviously I'm going to build on what was discussed there. This is really about making a distinction between life as we see it from our perspective, from our human perspective, and what life truly is in essence. So in the previous episodes, I've discussed the fact that life, like water, isn't the medium in which life appears. Water is life. Now, I'm going to clarify a bit what I mean by that. So water is life. But let's really try to drill down into why I'm saying something like this. So let's try to really delve into what life is at the core. So water is so fundamental. Why? Because just take a bottle of water and do the exercise yourself. Take a container, you put water in it. If you don't do anything, it'll be still. And then if you shake it, if you put movement into the bottle, you'll see that water then starts to fluctuate to reflect the energy or movement that was given it. So what is that property? And this is not necessarily water, it's liquid in general. There are many ways to define a liquid. Some say that it's a state of matter which takes whatever form, whatever you put it into a recipient, it will take the form of the recipient. But what if in fact the liquid state is, how should I say, it's a bridge between the non-physical and the physical. It is a bridge between pure energy and visible or tangible energy. So a liquid is basically a way to bring energy into a visible quality. So when you shake a bottle of water, the energy that you've put in the water becomes visible via the fluctuations on the surface of the water. So water reflects visually or physically the energy that is intangible. For instance, you shaking the bottle, that is an untangible form of energy. If you just wave your hand in the air, you wouldn't see the energy output. You wouldn't see the result of your energy. It would just dissipate in the air. But in a liquid, the liquid basically reflects the energy state or the energy input. And why is that so important? Well, imagine that, again, going back to all of the videos I've done previously, and if you followed all my videos, you'll understand. If you have two polarities, whereas there's zero and there's infinity. Zero is nothingness or void. Infinity is basically everything that ever exists. But as a vibration, and because for every vibration there's a vibration of opposite phase that necessarily exists, these two superimpose, cancel each other out, you're back to zero, and then zero interacts with itself. You can see that zero either twists around itself in an infinite number of dimensions, meets itself at every single point, and then enters into sort of a spontaneous vibration, and then because for vibration, there's a vibration of opposite phase, all of them cancel out, and you're back to zero, and this goes round and round like the yin and yang, infinitely fast. And so the true state of the reality of the universe is an infinitely fast fluctuation between everything and nothing, everything taking the form of vibrations, and everything can be represented as data. This is kind of linked to information theory, I guess, where everything that ever existed and exists and will exist and whatever can spontaneously emerge in an infinite space, represented as pure energy or pure information, and then collapse back into nothingness, and this goes round and round. And the way to break out of this is via the liquid state. The liquid state is basically almost like if you transformed, imagine an infinitely wide plane of not empty space, but a liquid state. So as if the entire universe was liquid. And of course, this has no boundaries. But just imagine a boundless reality, which is made of a liquid substance. Now, that liquid substance could not have a form. There's no form because it is not in a container. That is itself the container. But what's practical is that it will reflect any kind of energy input and convert it into a visual representation of that energy fluctuation. So right now, as you're sitting in your room listening to me, you're being traversed and are bathing in a sea of vibrations, electromagnetic vibrations of the earth, radio signals, all kinds of signals, your Wi-Fi signals, your phone signals, but you don't see them. You don't see them. You could give them like a visual form via certain devices that can, bring these into the visual spectrum. But you can't really interact with them in the physical. And the liquid state is a way to bring vibrations and energy into a state where, well, there's a certain interaction with them which is very specific and material. Now, we know, for instance, that waves normally in space don't really interfere with themselves, or they do, but not in the same way as a liquid would. So you can be bathing in a sea of radio waves it's mostly based on frequency. So waves of the same frequency would interfere, but if they're not on the same frequency, then they'll just pass each other and that's fine. But in a liquid, if you have a wave that's going this way and another wave that goes that way, they can collide, they can cancel each other out, they can interact one with the other in very subtle forms. So it's a way to bring into the visible something that is invisible, to go from non-physical to physical. And if you go back to Genesis, it clearly states, now the earth was formless and empty, darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Now, this to me is really, really profound, because the waters, it's like this prerequisite for giving specific forms to vibrations, and then it's focused attention which breathes life into water. So if you want to know how this happened, like sequentially, basically, you'd have zero and infinity. What is created first is this interference. Well, first of all, it's basically asymmetrical, focused attention. So between zero and infinity, you have the liquid state, which is basically almost like a slowing down of this switcheroo between infinity and nothingness. because in a zero-dimensional kind of plane, infinity appears in, like, there's just like everything appears infinitely fast as this infinitely compressed vibration that cancels itself out and then goes back to nothingness or void, and then this kind of goes on and on and on. And then in the liquid state, you manage to kind of slow down that process or create a medium in which energy or vibrations materialize in physical form. And then asymmetrical focused attention is the process via which a consciousness, which may be infinite, which we may call God, would focus on a one specific vibration and create a boundary around it. Something like you call it an ego, I guess. An envelope to distinguish its boundary vis-a-vis the outside. The first thing that has to happen is the difference between something that is inner, an inner reality or experience, something that is outer, outside of you. And this is artificial, obviously. It is artificial, it's an illusion, and many philosophers and thinkers and spiritual leaders have said that basically the inside is like the outside is like the inside. It's not like a drop in the ocean, it's like the ocean is the drop, and so on. And there's just like so many allegories that talk about this artificial distinction. But nevertheless, that is a prerequisite for experience and life, for transitioning into the realm of experience. So by doing that, what you do is, at the infinitely small scale, you create a multiverse made of vibrations. So this is like multiverse. But it isn't yet interconnected universes. It's more just an infinitely big space of liquid that comes alive because of a near infinite number of points of consciousness which project themselves into and identify themselves as one vibration or one wave or one form on inside that liquid and not another. And then these waves interact with each other, and what happens is you have almost like pockets of self-contained liquid water that appear, like a whirlpool, a self-contained whirlpool, which is the first torus or toroidal structure. And that's when the water basically separates into, it's this continuation where, there's a separation between the firmament and the land, or whatever you want to call it. But fundamentally, what is this? It's that this is light. This is sound, but visible sound or liquid sound. And light is a self-contained pocket of sound or liquid. And incidentally, the first black hole, which is a fundamental structure in the universe. Self-contained pocket of information also, because again, asymmetrical focused attention is what allows to make a split between a part of the ocean and the rest, where there is normally none. Like, you cannot really arbitrarily cut up the ocean in different parts or different pieces. It's all just one thing. But if you infuse energy into that ocean and there is a wave that appears on the ocean, then you can give yourself the illusion that that wave is you as an identity, and you build an ego around it. And that ego is just the asymmetrical focused attention. That is, it's almost as if there are two elements to God. There's the God that is immutable, that attention is symmetrical, meaning that it pays attention to everything in equal proportions, and therefore everything remains everything forever. And then this is the absolute God, the one that will never change. And then there is the relative, even that's a poorly chosen term, but the relative aspect of God, which is an asymmetrical focused attention, which is just the other side of the coin, which will focus its attention more on something than on something else, which is what can extract from out of infinity something as opposed to anything another thing. So long as you have a symmetrical or an absolute focus on everything, it's like so imagine if every information inside infinity had the same amplitude. And if it has the same amplitude, then it's the wave of opposite phase if it is exactly the same amplitude, it'll cancel itself out. But if you focus your attention on one side of the wave, and one side is the amplitude is very wide, and you focus less attention on the other one, sure, they'll interact and they'll cancel each other out slightly, but you'll have an imbalance, and this one will now appear on the surface of the water as something that exists, that appears. Whereas before, because you paid the same amount of attention exactly to everything, you didn't amplify anything via asymmetrically focused attention. And so the relative aspect of God will forever have this property of an asymmetrical attention, which is bound to extract out of infinity something and not something else via its asymmetrical focused attention. And that's how it is with humans as well. I mean, we don't focus on everything on our reality that we see. We do not give the same amount of attention to the walls inside a room, or to an object in the room, or to a human in the room. We have sort of a gradation in the amount of attention we focus on something. And the more attention we focus on something, the more we affect it. And the biggest unbalance or asymmetry in focused attention is when we physically interact with something. So in this, I'm sorry I'm going on tangents, but I'll promise I'll get back to this whole model once I'm done with these tangents. They're just taking me, it's just falling into place. And I don't know if I'm channeling this, I have no idea, but it's just these ideas pop into my mind and I have to go through them. So, this idea of the double split experience, where the fact of observing an experiment affects the outcome of the experiment, or the observer having an influence on the experiment. Well, that is a euphemism, because ultimately, we, as an observer, there are different gradations to our observation, to our power of observation, or our attention, where we focus our attention. Focusing our attention is sort of as just like visual attention on something, like observing something. That's one gradation in a whole gradient in terms of intensity of attention. And physical interaction is just the strongest one. So we obviously know that if you intervene in an experiment directly by manipulating it with your hands, then you obviously affect the experiment. Because we, as humans, tend to categorize things as physical interaction is intervening and influencing something, and looking at something, that's passive, that's not proactive involvement. But in fact, it's just on a lower scale in terms of the gradient of influence. And the least amount of influence is where you have absolutely zero attention that you focus on it. As soon as you're even for instance being present in a room, not even observing an experiment, but being present in a room, you give your attention to where you are. And by that attention that you're giving, you're affecting what's around you. It's just that you're affecting it at a lower level than if you actually took a hammer and started banging in the walls, but you still do. And it's just that arbitrarily we've decided that certain things are deemed or are considered having an influence on something, and some other actions have no influence. But so let's go back to this liquid. So this liquid now splits into the torus, and on the other side, it becomes a universe which is a self-contained pocket of light. But this is at the micro and the macro, and that's the same thing essentially. And at this point, you just have a whole universe that is quote unquote alive, like living light, basically. But living light that is quite formless. And so the liquid is now arranged in a specific manner. And then you go to, here you go to like quarks or whatever, can't really know. And then that would be galactic clusters. Then you have subparticles. That would be like galaxies. So galaxies are like self-contained pockets of subparticles. And then in galaxies, then you have solar systems. And that would be your atom. So solar systems are basically self-contained pockets of atoms. Then you have planets, which are self-contained pockets of molecules. And then smack in the middle, you have the living cell, which is just the latest aspect that life takes and which is right in the middle between 0 and infinity. And all of this is about avoiding perfect symmetry, avoiding interference. So when you have all of these vibrations there, because you focus your attention on something, so imagine a consciousness that focuses its attention on vibrations, and then it tries to find a strategy to protect itself from the influence of negative influence or interference or negative interference of other vibrations that may interact with it. It creates certain strategies to guard itself against that. One strategy is, for instance, to arrange itself in a torus fashion, a self-contained pocket of information, and therefore its interaction with other pockets of information, other black holes, will be much more complex, and the interference that can be created by those interactions will be quite different and much more complex. And so it's just by focusing your attention on a vibration as a relative kind of version of God or universal consciousness, as a consciousness, focusing an asymmetrical focused attention on something rather than something else, will create this idea of the ego and of trying to protect its inner integrity versus the outside, with this inner-outer distinction. And then the more you focus your attention, the more all of this falls into place, and it's almost like this effect of this sharpening effect of a camera. First, all things are blurred, and then everything sort of comes into focus at the same time. So all of this comes into focus at the same time gradually, and the living cell is what cements everything. And then the whole idea is for life to plunge its roots into the infinitely small and also expand into the infinitely large, and yet in this inner-outer kind of fashion, where there's a process of, like, there's this twofold process where the universe converges towards life, towards the living cell, which is at the center between 0 and infinity in the beginning, and then life expands back out into, so this is an inward process. And then this is an outward process where life expands out into the infinite and plunges its roots into the infinitely small and grows into the infinitely large. So a human is like a living cell plunging its roots into itself, kind of, biology, and then humans becoming arranging in themselves harmoniously on this planet is like a planet becoming alive, and so like life basically now envelops the molecules and planets in it, and then this life expands and expands and expands until the universe as an entirety is like this whole very highly complex living organism. And all that is possible thanks to this. All that is necessary for that to happen, is asymmetrical focused attention, which creates this idea of an ego, a self, and an other, and then this whole game of protecting your inner integrity versus the outside and everything that you put into place to do that. And that translates into all the complex human societies we've developed, which is also a way to protect our inner integrity versus the outside. Um, avoid aggression, ensure survival, etc. Um, but you see that this inner outer barrier is moving. So a planet would consider its inner barrier or inner self as what's happening inside of it, which is humans, and its outer reality would be something else. So I hope this went a little further in this whole idea of what is life, where it came from. Um, Again, same thing. Don't hesitate to leave a comment. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and talk to you in the next video.